Hello and welcome to the final episode of Pakistanomy for 2020. I have with me Ariba Shahid and Amar Khan, two guests who don't need any introduction because they've been so generous with their time for the entire year, coming on the show regularly, talking about what's going on in the economy. And I figured I have them here to do a rundown of what 2020 was like for the Pakistani economy and what their predictions and outlook is for 2021. So, Ariba, maybe we start off with you. I think back at 2019, at the end of 2019, and everyone was like, this decade was terrible. 2019, what an awful year. 2020, here I come. And then a pandemic came. And I think the situation was kind of similar for the Pakistani economy, which was in the dumps, and everyone was hoping 2020 would be much, much better. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and the lockdown and everything else that followed. So, what was 2020 like from your perspective, looking at the economy and everything that has happened?
Honestly, when we walked into 2020, both the personal level, everyone was like, it's our year, blah blah blah. But when we walked into 2020, the economy was bad. Like there's no sugarcoating the fact inflation was high, the economy was bad. मतलब इतना हो गया था कि we thought there was another rise in the interest rate was on the cards. It was that bad, right? Um, but the fact remains that it at the end of 2020 when I'm sitting over here, I don't think it went as bad as it should have, considering we had a pandemic. It could have been a lot worse, and for some reason, we survived, and not only survived the virus, but the economy survived. And without, you know, the inflation, it's pretty okay-ish. Like I'm not gonna say it's good, but it isn't as bad as one thought it would be at the beginning of the year. But of course, the government hasn't got its act together, but it hasn't lost its shit completely.
Amar, what do you think?
Uh, I mean, it's the pandemic, right? It's just all over the place. और उसमें to be fair, we fared pretty well, but again उसमें आप ये भी कह सकते हो कि it was because of the low base effect. मतलब और कितना आप उसमें नीचे जाते. So yeah, it's kind of a thing we fared really well, and we fared better than many of the other emerging economies out there. So props to that. One of the reasons is because we have a pretty large informal economy, pretty large cash-based economy. So that kept chugging along, and that supported the formal economy. And eventually, we were able to pull ourselves up. Propaganda aside, there's a lot of propaganda कि जी highest ever numbers, highest ever this, highest ever that. उसको side पे रखें. If you look at a long enough timeline, long enough by here I mean about 12 to 18 months, तब भी we're still much below where we were in January or even December. But yes, I mean, जब काफी एक चीज नीचे चली जाती है तो the low base effect kicks in and then you start growing. So let's just hope we can keep building on this and at least get some kind of a sustainable growth rate to the north of 4 to 5%.
Yeah, I think the low base point is very important, right? So I was talking to someone and they're like, yeah, it's like a V-shaped recovery. And I was like, well, the peak of the V in Pakistan in 2019 was already pretty low. So you've hit a V, but the V is not something to be proud of in the case of where growth was pre-pandemic. But from your perspective, I'll ask each one of you of this, maybe starting with Ariba first. What were some of the key things that, choices that were made either by the government or the state bank? Of course, interest rates were slashed pretty quickly, but there was a lot more that happened on top of that. So, what would you say were the contributing factors to why this wasn't as worse as what one would have envisioned a pandemic to be like, beyond the fact that the base was pretty low?
In some cases, the government was proactive. Um, the fact is that while the pandemic started, there was some miscommunication on the government's part where they weren't actively explaining to people whether lockdown hoga, nahi hoga, and that was some confusion. And until that happened, things weren't really in control. But the minute the government announced, lockdown karenge, but it'll be a smart lockdown, and it's going to be like this, and industries are going to work like this, that is the moment we start picking up pace. Um, so that's one thing that I kind of appreciate that the government did is, hey, you continue with your industries, you follow SOPs. That is one thing that we needed as a poor country. The immediate cash disbursement was a really good measure because you need to inject liquidity into the market, not really into the market, but into the masses. And that is one thing that the government efficiently did. As far as the state bank is concerned, the state bank has usually always been a reactive, body. But this pandemic brought it out in a more proactive way. So they had been proactively, mediating the situation that was to come in the form of slashes, in the form of, concessions to banks, in the form of concessions to regulatory authorities, and just across the board, state bank is one of the pillars that have actually supported the government throughout this. In the meanwhile, yeah, if we talk about other, like the government, if we talk about the government alone, I guess the cash disbursement is something that we need to applaud, because that is something that even the United States may have struggled with. Pakistan did it pretty well.
Amar, what do you think about the fact that, when interest rates were climbing up 13% or so, the argument being made by the bank was that there's high inflation environment, we need to jack up rates, and inflation, of course, did not come down. And now that the rates have been slashed, inflation is pretty much at the same level. Do you think that this experience will finally bust the myth in Pakistan that Pakistan tends to have demand pull inflation, and therefore in a high inflation environment, the bank must raise rates to deal with the problem? Or do you think we'll continue going back to that playbook? I think can you hear us, Amar?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. Uzair, you are correct. I know interest rates, people take these things very personally at times. So, they get militant when you talk about demand pull or supply push. They just take it personally. Jaise wo khud baith ke interest rate set kar rahe hain. So let's just take a step back and, figure things out here. We were at double digit rates, 13%. Inflation was there, but if you just review Pakistan's history over the last, let's say, 25 years, you will mostly find cost push inflation. Inflation Pakistan with the 08 to 10 oil prices jacked up, that was a major cause of inflation. PKR USD depreciation, that is a cause of inflation. Wheat prices increase, commodity pricing rate, that is a cause of inflation. So wheat price इसलिए increase नहीं हो रही क्योंकि लोग आटा ज्यादा खा रहे हैं, ठीक है? गंदम की प्राइस इसलिए इंक्रीज हो रही है, या तो वहां पे शॉर्टेज है, या आपके पास जो है आप इंपोर्ट ही नहीं कर पा रहे, या वट एवर रीजन, इट्स अ सप्लाई इशू नॉट अ डिमांड इशू. क्लासिक अगर इकोनॉमिक्स हम देखें उसमें बोलते हैं कि जी डिमांड पुल अगर है तो उसमें आप ऐसा करें इंटरेस्ट रेट बढ़ा दें, लोग जो हैं वो खर्च करना कम कर देंगे और इन्फ्लेशन नीचे आ जाएगी. जिसके बाद रोटी खाने को नहीं है वो क्या खर्चा कम करेगा. और so it's one of those, you don't have bread eat cake kind of examples out there. So that's pretty much about it. Right now, I think inflation has tapered off, but still, abhi bhi jo inflation hai, that's mostly due to supply side pressures. There are a lot of cost pressures out there. You've got wheat issues, you've got sugar, you've got anything and everything, any commodity out there that is a pressure. And then you also have people out there who say कि नहीं, internationally prices increase हो रही हैं इसलिए हो रहा है. भाई आप गंदम में पिछले 10 साल से self sufficient हो, कौन सी इंटरनेशनल प्राइस इफेक्ट हो रही है? यस, इंटरनेशनल प्राइस अफेक्ट यू बिकॉज गंदम जो है वो स्मगल हो रही है यहाँ से. दिस इज व्हाई इट्स अफेक्टिंग यू. गेस हुज रिस्पांसिबिलिटी इट इज टू स्टॉप स्मगलिंग. I will let the people who are watching this decide. It's as simple as that. Yes, there will be leakages, there will be in wastage, ठीक है, बट आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि इंटरनेशनली प्राइस इंक्रीज हो रही है तो हमारा फर्ज है. चलो इंटरनेशनली नीचे आ गए, आपके यहाँ कीमत नीचे आई, up international price wala argument kahan gaya. So I think there's a lot of what I've seen over the last 12 months. There's a lot of cherry picking out there. KG, whatever number suits you, that becomes part of propaganda and so on. Nevertheless, I think what the state bank is doing, we've read jo inki monetary policy statements hote hain, jo minutes hote hain, if you read usme, it's very clear that they're focusing on the core inflation right now, rather than the headline inflation, and rightfully so, because headline includes a lot major component of that, that's food and fuel. Food and fuel got hata to core inflation is fairly stable. Pakistan over the last 10 years, we maintained 10 to 12 years, we maintained a real interest rate of about 2 to 2.5%. Abhi jo hamara real interest rate chal raha, that's negative. And that's fine. You don't have to be all hawkish about it. Again, interest rate chal raha hai niche. You're finally recovering from a pandemic. In fact, still going through it, and interest rates at this level are just fine. Core inflation, we're just targeting core inflation now. Core inflation ke hisab se we're pretty much in the range of real rates agar dekhein. So that's about 50 to 100 bips. So that's a good range to work with. And the Prime Minister, the government, one of the major, let's say, cornerstones of the strategy is the Naya Pakistan Housing Scheme. As everyone knows, जैसा कि सबको पता है, housing के लिए the key component is mortgage rate. ठीक है? If mortgage rate goes into double digits, you simply cannot expect any kind of mortgage industry or housing industry to develop. So in order to push that up, there needs to be some kind of a, let's say, markup पे subsidy तो मिल रही है, but rates need to be in a stable range. If you go back to double digit territory again, it's going to be back to 2000, let's say 12 or 13 again. So that's the story here.
So do either of you think that, we talked about obviously inflation being an issue, the government's failure to control, I wouldn't say control, but deal with the supply side challenges structurally, to me at least stands out as one of the starkest sort of shortcomings of 2020. In fact, it's been ongoing for the last several months now. Would you categorize that as the biggest shortcoming of 2020 from the government's perspective, or is there something else that stands out to you in the sense that when you look at the government's economic response, its economic strategy, where did it fall short throughout this period?
I think they haven't been, any single commodity you look at, there has been some kind of supply disturbance. That could have been resolved. मतलब ऐसा नहीं कि बहुत गंदम इंपोर्ट करना या गंदम की सप्लाई मेंटेन करना कोई बहुत मुश्किल काम नहीं है. दुनिया में हजारों साल से मेरे ख्याल से ये होता आ रहा है और आगे होता भी रहेगा. सेम गोस फॉर शुगर. आज से कोई 9 से 12 महीने पहले एक बहुत ही धमाकेदार शुगर सेक्टर पे एक रिपोर्ट आई थी जी. करप्शन एक्सपोज हो गई, सब कुछ हो गई. रिगार्डलेस चीनी की कीमत जो है वो कुछ 100 रुपए किलो हो गई थी. इंपोर्ट करी हुकूमत ने चीनी, अब वो फखर से बताते हैं कि जी अब 80 रुपए की. यार मतलब आपने बहुत बड़ा काम किया इंपोर्ट करके. दिस इज अ वेरी स्टैंडर्ड प्रोसीजर. मोर इम्पोर्टेंटली, व्हाई शुड द स्टेट इवन बी बॉदरिंग विद इंपोर्टिंग कमोडिटीज? वाई मतलब ये ऐसे कंट्रोल्स क्यों है कि हर चीज में गंदम की शॉर्टेज हो तो स्टेट इंपोर्ट करेगी, चीनी की शॉर्टेज हो तो शक्कर की शॉर्टेज हो तो स्टेट इंपोर्ट करेगी. एलएनजी इज अ क्लासिक एग्जांपल. एक शोर मचा रहता है एलएनजी पे. इनफैक्ट एक तरफ से एक बंदा कहता है कि जी इतना नुकसान हो गया, दूसरी तरफ से बंदा कहता है नहीं इतना नुकसान नहीं हुआ, और दोनों पार्टियां गलत बोल रही होती हैं. दैट्स लाइक द बेस्ट पार्ट अबाउट इट. सो अगेन state should not be involved. The state should not interfere in जिसे कहते हैं commodity imports. गैस की बात होती है कि हमेशा आपको पता है पिछले कुछ 10 साल से तो मैं देख रहा हूँ कि सर्दियों में गैस की शॉर्टेज होती है. एवरीवन नोज कि सब डिमांड बढ़ जाती है. Why
it's almost become like the Ramzan food price inflation, right? Everyone knows Ramzan mein prices will go up, and we know in winter gas shortage.
अगर if state जो regulatory authorities हैं, जो भी relevant bodies हैं, अगर वो demand ही determine नहीं कर पाए, तो then I think we have a much serious problem. You have only one job here. ठीक है. To ensure that gas is available at every household, or at least line में gas available हो. If it's not available, ठीक है, that is the problem. ठीक है, that is your job कि आपको जी वो availability ensure करनी है. अब कहेंगे नहीं जी मैं import भी कर लेता हूँ, मैं उसको distribute भी कर दूंगा, मैं मगर उसका बिल भी नहीं लूंगा. So again we have a problem here. So इस साल के I would मतलब this was a pandemic here and the government managed it really well. You've got to give it to them, all props to them. But the way supply chains were managed, I think it's probably one of the worst years in terms of supply chain management. मतलब इतनी मिसमैनेजमेंट सप्लाई चेन्स में मुझे पिछले कोई 10 से 15 साल में नजर नहीं आती. ठीक है, एक कमोडिटी का मसला होता है, दो का होता है. अभी तो हर जो भी कमोडिटी देख लें उसका मसला आ रहा है. अभी अब थोड़े दिनों में आपको मेज का मसला आएगा. So
well, yeah, I mean today I was just going to say the finance advisor said to control prices of chicken because they're going up because maize prices have gone up. Ariba, what's your take on this? Like, is the supply chain the biggest shortcoming of 2020, or is there something else that stands out for you?
With the pandemic, I would have thought कि कोई और issue highlight होगा. The government's going to screw up something else. And to be very honest, this is why it's called a screw up. The very fact that the supply chain shortcome is not really an impact of COVID. COVID had nothing to do with this. This was just general incompetence. Like back in June when we had a petroleum shortage, that was absolute craziness. And uspek government rhetorics pe khele game and say, oh my God, we stopped, smuggling of fuel from Iran, and that is why this happened. So if they're just playing games with you at this point, and the fact remains that they sucked. They were terrible at this job of maintaining, the supply chain for basic commodities that that the people need. And again, it's like like Amar said, gas is like an age-old thing. We're now used to it. Before December even starts, before winter starts, everyone knows it's going to happen. And it's not like they didn't know. All right, it's not like this is all new. And when you have a pandemic, again, I would honestly assume other things being highlighted, other issues related to the pandemic emerging, like let's say a healthcare emergency or a lack of resources. But we didn't see that. What we saw is हमारे मुल्क में आटा चीनी ये महंगा हो रहा है, which, to be honest, the agriculture sector did not really even suffer because of the pandemic. क्योंकि वहाँ तो it's not like clustered filled city, it wasn't as damaged as one would hope, or as one would think, not hope, sorry. But yeah, general incompetence is all I'm going to say with regards to the supply chain for commodities. And like Amar said, बहुत अच्छा काम किया. Pandemic went well in comparison, but supply chain was something that has every commodity, आप जिस चीज पे हाथ रखो, it is beyond the means of a person with their salary, with their income, whatever it is. And that is one reason why, in terms of politics as well, the PTI has been facing adversaries in this situation. The minute, I don't know, I remember you and I had this talk, everything's getting back in control. And then we felt that, we jinxed it. But the fact remains, they couldn't deal with a very simple task. And like Amar says, I completely agree. This is unprecedented within the last 10 years.
And it erodes your economic recovery, right? So you mentioned,
Yes,
Ariba, that there's a cash transfer program.
Think about it this way. आप cash transfer करो, आप किसी को 12,000 दो. अब पहले in that 12,000 you could get, let's say, so and so good, and now you can, because on one hand you're giving them money, on the other hand the prices of things have increased to such an extent that the basic purchasing power of a person has been slashed, especially considering a lot of people have lost their source of income during the pandemic. So when we were talking about recoveries and we were talking about V-shape, I would say Pakistan's the J-shape recovery. But the fact remains that, आप जो भी करते रहो, whatever you do, you could give people 12,000 rupees. You could have a subsidized housing scheme, but if people don't have roti, tawal, chini to eat, you won't have people that are going to vote for you. You don't have people at all.
Amar, the other thing that stands out to me for 2020, and after that, I'll sort of move on to the business story aspect of 2020. The government's focus has been, you mentioned the Naya Pakistan housing scheme, but I would say it's essentially been the year of real estate development. We've had amnesties given, a sort of mini construction boom taking place all of a sudden. Bundal Island, Ravi Development Authority, the cabinet taking notice of quote unquote propaganda against those schemes. How do you see this push in terms of the construction sector and talking about real estate development?
You forgot to mention one very big private sector one. I'm not going to say it.
Uzair, this isn't the year for real estate development. We've had a full decade of real estate development, and the scary bit here is that we might see another decade of real estate development where basically you will have more houses and flats for rich people and less houses for anyone who cannot afford. I'll give you an example here. State Bank has a markup scheme, subsidized जो नया पाकिस्तान की housing scheme है. Maximum limit property for that is 6 million rupees. 60 लाख रुपए की प्रॉपर्टी होगी, उसका तकरीबन को मिनिमम जो उसका साइज होना चाहिए वो 850 स्क्वायर फुट होना चाहिए. कराची, लाहौर, इस्लामाबाद, you go on Zameen right now and you look for these properties. Maximum value की बात कर रहा हूँ उसमें. You will barely find any property outside Bahria town.
Apparently what they're saying is this is to encourage people to move out of cities and to develop towards the undeveloped areas.
I'm sure, if someone wants to move out of Karachi to, I don't know, like somewhere Dadu or something. That's fine, you know.
Exactly.
You need to create jobs for them as well. There needs to be a whole ecosystem out there.
You can't
So,
just
you know,
give them cheap housing.
see, cheap housing, again, you know, the supply is in there. ठीक है, जितने भी projects हो रहे हैं, real estate projects नए बन रहे हैं, you won't find a single project which is basically for affordable housing. FGEHA का एक project है, but that's pretty much about it. You will not find any private developers going for low cost housing. It's simply not happening. So yes,
I think the
it's
last example of low cost housing, the last example of private sector low cost housing was Beria Town with the 26 lakh ke flats. That's the lowest.
But
private
even
sector
that's
has
not
gone
low
in the
cost,
last
right?
5
I
years.
mean,
Of course,
the idea of affordable housing around the world is
is
that
not.
can your blue collar
Yeah.
worker become a property owner? Can a blue collar worker buy a 26 lakh apartment? No.
No.
See, Uzair, yes, they can. ठीक है, चलो, let's assume hypothetically for a bit, you know, they can, you know, 15 साल पे amortize कर दो, so on and so forth. But when that apartment is not close to the place they work, when they have to do a commute of 2 hours daily, whatever they're saving, they're basically spending on transportation. So just doesn't make sense. आपको बहुत सारी ऐसी examples मिलेंगी, बड़े-बड़े शहर बने, मगर वहाँ पे कोई नौकरी नहीं थी, कुछ काम करने का नहीं था, and then boom, nothing happened. So yes, the amnesty was there. I think it was a great amnesty for, you know, if you had real estate, if you had a lot of gray or black capital, आप उसको white करें, मतलब तो आपके लिए तो बहुत अच्छी चीज़ है अगर आप बहुत अमीर हैं and you have a lot of property which is basically undeclared or gray. But कहना कि जी इससे किसी आम आदमी को फायदा हुआ, इससे हाउसिंग अफोर्डेबिलिटी बढ़ गई, that is completely nonsense. ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं हुआ है. Even if you look at the State Bank numbers right now, mortgage house financing जो है, bank employees का जो number है, bank employees को जो housing मिली हुई है, that's at 120 billion rupees. Normal consumer housing is just at 80 billion rupees. So, you know, banks just only basically lending to their employees. And let's see how this changes over the next few months or years. They have a target, but I really doubt if anything is going to come out of it other than snazzy campaigns and, you know, random promises. So that's a story. Baat sari aati Ravi riverfront, Karachi, Bundal Island. Like someone needs to tell them कि यार कराची में जो हो रहा है पहले उसको सही कर दो, and then Bundal Island को develop करने की कोशिश करो. It just simply does not make
like,
sense.
Think about
Karachi does not have a single operational sewage treatment plant.
Of course.
Probably the only mega city in the world with a population of more than 10 million, which basically it's just throwing shit in water for crying out loud.
At your middle of sea view.
Middle
behind the
at
McDonald's.
The beach, it doesn't have a single
Exactly.
sewage treatment plant, and then you have someone with enough gall to say कि जी Bundal and Guspe जो है $1 billion की investment होगी. Like how many MOUs do you want to sign? I would like to sign an MOU for 10 billion rupees investment, but that means nothing. I mean, Bundal पे आप develop कर लोगे, मतलब this place stinks basically, ठीक है? So again, you need to, in order to develop Bundal first, you need to develop Karachi first. You need to ensure basic necessities, basic service delivery is happening in Karachi. Only then you can develop Bundal. कोई आगे कह रहा था जब दुबई नहीं जाएंगे, ये Governor Singh was saying दुबई नहीं जाएंगे, Bundal जाएंगे. Like, what's wrong with you? Like,
what is up with Dubai?
It's unbelievable. Same was for Ravi. I mean, it's the exact same model here. The hope there is कि private investor आएंगे, वो बनाएंगे, buildings बनाएंगे, and you know people will have a ball there. But that's not going to happen. You need to have basic infrastructure in place for anything to happen. Karachi does not even have basic waste collection mechanism in place. ठीक है, वो आप बुंदल पे आप क्या वेस्ट कलेक्शन करोगे? जो सारा वेस्ट कराची से जनरेट होगा, कराची से क्या पहले बुंदल जाएगा, फिर वहां पे वेस्ट कलेक्ट होगा. Like, that's just ridiculous. So yes, real estate, I believe it's one of the major reasons why Pakistan is in the state it is right now, because all of the capital moved into real estate. And if real estate continues to be the focus, so I don't think anything better can come out of it, to be honest.
Ariba, what are your thoughts?
I agree, to be
You
honest.
agree?
It's absolutely stupid. Like, well, it's absolutely stupid what the government is doing. Bundal Island, you're doing an ecosystem, first of all. you're just spreading yourself out so much to the extent that जो सही कर सकते हो वो भी नहीं सही होगा, and it's stupid. Honestly, it's stupid. I
Okay, so
find
there's
no
there's no economic rationale, and I think
no,
that we'll see where
and
these
there's
things
more
go.
of a cost. There's more of a cost. There's more of a social cost. There's more of a cost overall. Like honestly, they're just ruining it.
Well, I just think based on this section, our episode may be taken down because there's directives to combat propaganda against these projects. So we'll see how that goes. But Ariba, you're a business journalist. What's the biggest business story of 2020? And we know among us that you've had your run-ins this year with covering some stories and some companies. But what's the biggest business story that stands out for you out of Pakistan this year?
This year, I don't know. You told me to think about this question. I thought put it like I thought put it in, and honestly, nothing. I just find it interesting how during a pandemic, we had 2 IPOs. Good, not amazing, good. It doesn't really matter, but okay. But it's not the biggest story of the year, and raising capital for startups, nah, doesn't really matter. Businesses are okay. I don't think anything was amazing. Like I'm going to sound a pessimist right now, but I don't think anything was something worth like, oh my god, ye kya ho gaya Pakistan mein? Nothing revolutionary, nothing out of the blue. The textile bullshit that they're feeding down your throat, the textile industry is back to its capacity more than it ever was. That's all bullshit too. Nothing's amazing. Nothing's out of the blue, extraordinary, amazing that I'm going to go like, oh my god, this is the best story. Everything's okay, mediocre
Amar?
at the best.
I agree with Ariba. There is nothing that really stands out. कि वाह यार क्या जबरदस्त चीज हुई है. No, nothing of that sort. But one thing that is moving the needle and would prove to be beneficial in the near to long term is the State Bank's TERF facility, temporary economic refinance facility. I think that's really good. You're having a lot of capital expenditure. Companies are expanding. They are going into new projects. Manufacturing facility is being stepped up. So yeah, that is one thing that can really add to our growth rate going forward. So again, it's not really a story, but it's just one metric, which I feel that's probably the
Supporting
only
the
positive
economy.
metric
Exactly.
out there.
It's just a support to businesses, and
Yeah.
uski wajah se if a business grows exponentially, that's completely different. But overall, काफी
But
ठंडा साल था.
overall, I don't think there is literally any story out there to win. Nothing really stood out. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so looking at 2021, how do you see, are you going to be like, screw you 2020, here I come 2021, like everyone did in 2019?
I
or
didn't. अच्छा मजे की बात है. Okay, on a personal level, I didn't do that because I don't believe in New Year, New Me, or this year is gonna be my year because I just know okay that's my luck. नहीं कुछ नहीं होने वाला और बुरा होता जाएगा. And the point is that 2020 pe, like the clock strikes 12 and the virus isn't going away. The virus is here until we've got the vaccine. We don't really know how well the vaccine's going to work. We can hope and pray that it does work well. And we're expected to get it around March. And I really hope that it not only is efficient, but it's also effective. And that's something that people need to realize. Okay, just because you have the vaccine doesn't mean the virus is going to end. The virus still exists. You may just not catch it. So 2021, I'm optimistic. I hope it's a good year. I hope okay, we get over Corona, we get over inflation. If we get over these two things, there's hope.
So low targets for you, like get the vaccine out, control the supply chain, which one would assume are the base necessities. Amar, what do you think about 2021?
I think 2021 would definitely be better than 2020, to be honest. I expect a
No,
number
don't say
of
that. Don't jinx
major.
it. Knock wood. Don't jinx it.
So 2021, I just expect a lot of infrastructure projects to finally complete, a lot of new capital investments, a lot of new manufacturing facilities to come online. So I'm just
I have a
hopeful
question,
on.
Amar.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
2021 में dam बनेगा?
Yeah, dam तो देखो 2030 तक बन जाए तो that would be an achievement. I think instead of जैसे कहते हैं getting fixated on large audacious projects and large goals, there needs to be a more focus on getting the smaller things right first. And that is where I say, okay, manufacturing facility coming up, some kind of support, or more software oriented exports happening. Take a lot of stuff that needs to be done in tech. There is still some hope, to be honest. On the regulatory front, over the last few months, there have been pretty good SECP, other entities out there. They have been at least trying to create an enabling environment. So I'm just hoping it's just going to work out. But on one side you've got people doing good things, and on the other side you've got people who can't really ensure supply of wheat.
So,
I
So
think
yeah, I
in
mean,
2021 mein, the star of the show was not the government, was the state bank. Raza Bakir, MVP of the year.
the IMF agent placed in
I
Pakistan has
mean,
been a success. Amar, what were you saying?
well, that's not. I mean, yeah, I think the State Bank has done a good job here. ठीक है. मतलब, I've got to give it to them. ठीक है. I've been
Yeah,
critical of them
they've
quite a
they've
bit. ठीक है. But
changed
they've
their
done a
ways too.
good job.
Like
मतलब
they've
they've done
changed
a
their
good job.
ways. Like I as in the way they used to even present data, they're changing. They're actually
They're
changing.
changing. They're evolving. So
Like
that
I
is
went to
where.
a press conference. I went to a press conference and I asked a question, and Raza Bakir saw my face and he thought, isko answer acha nahi laga. And that is when he got his spokesperson to call me after the conference. Like, does she need does she need more clarification? And that is why I feel like they are changing, and they're coming up with graphs. They're charting things, and it's not the same old charts that we've seen over the years. These are really basic things, but you can see that they're looking at things from a different approach. And
Yeah.
even though he's an IMF puppet,
Oh yeah, by the way, that was a tongue-in-cheek comment before someone comes
I
after
know.
me for pushing a
No,
conspiracy
of course.
Yeah.
theory.
No, but like people have been critical of him from for being a white man's person. But the fact remains that he's actually good at his job, and he's actually looking at things not from an old boomer uncle perspective. He's actually looking at it from a very different perspective, which we really needed, because we've had a lot of boomer uncles telling us what to do, and he doesn't have the boomer uncle vibe. He has
Amar,
lots
will
of WhatsApp
Pakistan
messages.
finally have a unified payments interface and a payment stack in 2021 that can enable digital payments? Because we heard in 2020 it was coming in August, it never came.
The let's say the building blocks are in place, and
It's gonna take
it will be
time.
there. It will be there. Again, good things are happening on that front as well. We're late to the party, but good things are happening on that front,
I
and
feel
you will
it's
see.
going to be a little delayed though. As in, you won't see maybe towards the end, but I'm not really hopeful.
A lot of stuff is happening on that front, and you will see a number of use cases coming out for commercial payments very soon. And then it is up to the private sector to really grab it and just scale it up. So the rails are in place. On the tech front, if the government doesn't screw it up with random, let's say, bans and arbitrary decisions, we can really catch up on that front. बट अगेन अगर कोई आके पीछे बोलता है कि जी ये क्या कर रहे हैं आप, ये तो गलत है, इसको बंद कर देना चाहिए, तो फिर वो बंद हो जाएगा, फिर उसके बाद भी चलेगा.
How many things do you think the government banned this year?
In
That's a
2021?
long list. I think it's a very, very long list. It's a hilarious list. Every other day there's something that is banned. So, can't really say.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest risk, is that before March, there is some sort of, I think it's a very low probability event, but there's increased political instability in the country, and things happen as a result of that take on their own life. It hasn't happened yet. I don't see it happening. But to me, at least heading into Q1 of 2021, that's the biggest sort of risk that I see, is that things just go off the rails to an extent in the political domain that it bleeds into the economy, and then no one knows what's going to happen. And we just don't know. And I think that's where the polarization in society, we saw, things like really vile hashtags trend yesterday. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, in a way, I used to wake up in the United States a few years ago with a story about a bomb blast. a few bomb blasts every other day, and now making up to these hashtags. Maybe it's a decent choice in terms of you've shifted people to becoming keyboard warriors of the most vile sort, but it is also very dangerous. So I think the political shift, at least for me, is the biggest sort of ace in the hole. I don't know what you guys think about the on the risk side, what you see as being the biggest unresolved issues going into the next year.
It's actually really strange because we've had parties competing against each other, but and this has always been happening. Like things have been said about Benazir over the years as well. Um, so it's not something that's
Yeah,
new,
it's
but it's just so widespread on a grassroots level on Twitter and whatnot. Like they were absolutely disgusting hashtags, to be very honest. They were absolutely disgusting. And I felt when I went through the hashtags, a lot of them were basically talking about how bad the hashtags were, and they were drawing more attention to it. And you could tell a lot of them were bot accounts. The social media teams for both parties, all parties, have been absolutely vile throughout this, and it's a moral degradation of our society as a whole. But this is not something new. This used to happen in the past as well. This is happening right now. It's not new. I'm sorry, I'm not going to say that's new. It's
Yeah.
not new.
Amar, what's the unresolved issue going into 2021?
circular debt.
Hmm.
Political volatility has been there since forever, and like we should all just get over it and get on with the program.
Circular debt has
Circular
been
debt.
there forever. We should all get over it and just move on.
No, actually, we cannot get over it because it just hurts us every day. And it's been there since 2010. So yeah, it's been almost 10 years. It's been a full decade, and we simply haven't been able to crack the code here. So yeah, I think if the biggest issue for me is just circular debt, because you unlock liquidity there, a lot of things are just going to resolve on their own. We'll just the market will take care of it. But again, once again, the state needs to stop interfering in everything. So if the state needs to do one thing, and that's it, that's just not to do everything.
You know, I
Just
feel
just
that
just
whenever
sit
Imran
back.
Khan says कि मैं notice ले रहा हूँ इस चीज की prices में पे उस चीज की price और बढ़ जाती है.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's hilarious. Like, it's basically a
Please, Imran
self-fulfilling
Khan, please
prophecy.
notice my salary.
वो टैक्स वाला आ जाएंगे आपके पीछे. ठीक है. So point remains, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. ठीक है, and it's kind of hilarious. So मतलब the government needs to do less and not more, and not just interfere in everything out there. Have enabling systems in place, have enabling markets in place, and everything will take care of itself. ठीक है.
Do you think that
That's
the
it basically.
movement that they've started on sort of the Pakistan steel mills will continue into 2021 and will finally be done with this long
so.
delayed
I
issue of
don't
the
think
PSM?
so. Sadly, this government has not been able to tackle the problem of public sector enterprises, because, as luck would have it, as you say, political volatility. When these guys were in opposition, they totally opposed whatever was happening, and that thing did not happen at that point in time. Now, hundreds of billion rupees of losses later, they want to do the same thing again. So the opposition this time will not allow them to do it as well. So it's just like a very bad loop, and the way the whole Pakistan steel transaction is going, I really don't think anything is going to come out of it. We can see what happened with PIA, how they basically botched the whole aviation sector, like whatever was left of the aviation sector in the country. So, I don't think anything is going to come out of it. It's just going to be a stalemate.
Reba?
Sorry, what's the question?
No, I mean, do you think what do you think about those privatization drive, particularly on the PSM? Like, do you think that continues, or it's just more of the same, you muddle along?
I hope so. But like Amar said, the chances of that actually getting through in reality are slim, because obviously the opposition. Because if you I don't know, like if you pick up speeches of Asad Umar, if you pick up speeches of everyone else, they were very vocal about this very issue, and they riled people up on this very issue and similar other issues. And you just can't, it can't happen that way. It just can't. The opposition won't let it happen. They're already looking for weaknesses within your arguments because of the whole PDM thing. It's not possible. I hope it happens. If it does, that's good, because the steel mills has been absolutely, terrible for us. Over the years, it's been terrible, and there's no sugarcoating it. It's a cost. It's a burden. It's a cost. It's dead weight.
Okay, well, so if I were to sum this up, not a lot of high hopes for 2021. Investment will
One
continue to
high hope.
happen.
One high
Yes.
hope. We have started to see import substitution kick in to an extent.
But
Local
is, so again,
production
I
of
mean,
things that you
let's
never
talk
thought.
about this. Let me get Amar's view on this first, and then I'll come back to you, Ariba. But is import substitution even the right strategy? Like, isn't import, like I had Dr. Gonzalo Varela on my show talking about exports, and he was like, if you start doing import substitution, you actually are anti-export. And so Amar, do you
Of
think
course,
import
yeah.
substitution is the right path forward for Pakistan?
Export promotion is the right path. When export promotion is happening, again, the market will take care of it. Because again, see, for import substitution to happen, basically, on a very fundamental level, you need to increase duties. You need to increase overall tariffs out there, whether it's commercial or non-commercial or non-tariff barriers out there. You need to enact barriers. When you enact barriers, a lot of primary intermediate goods which can be used for exports are not allowed into the country. So basically,
but it is working in some sectors. Like, it is working in some sectors which were really ignored, like the skincare sector,
yes,
for instance.
but
I felt that those sectors, obviously, it's not a widespread thing that should go across all industries. I'm not going to propagate that, but it has brought up some industries that we didn't even think that could emerge over here.
See, that's the thing. They're not industries. They're not industries. They're mostly small businesses.
They're not big enough. Yeah, they're small businesses.
Small businesses, right? Someone's producing cheese. That's basically a small business. I mean, you're losing sight of the forest for the trees here. So that's the thing. When I think export promotion is much better, and I'm sure there are trade experts out there who agree with this.
The fact remains that okay, what are you going to export?
Yeah, that's you need to develop an industry, man. You can export anything and everything, from cutlery to furniture
to really have much
fish
to offer.
See, that's the thing. We have a lot to offer, but that's not really being explored, or let's say value is being added. Like, I'll give you an example of our long ass coastline. We barely export any fish out from there. We've got huge markets in the Middle East, and you can basically literally do farm to, let's say, sea to market in 12 hours. Like, it's easier to send fish to, let's say, Dubai or Muscat or Jeddah than it is to Lahore.
Yeah.
So why not? Why can't we explore that market? Or let's say, why can't we export cutlery? Why can't we export furniture? So a lot of it is simply not happening because exporting, there's an anti-export bias here. It's very difficult to become an exporter. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who has a wonderful food processing unit in Skardu. It's been a pain for him to even be eligible to start exporting apricots from Skardu. In Islamabad, you will get sliced apricots from Turkey, but getting the same apricots from Skardu to Islamabad is a pain. So this is the thing here. We have a lot to export, but we are simply not doing it. It's not really happening.
And I think at the core of this also is, we touched upon this earlier. Where are your investments being directed to, right? Are they being directed
and just to add here, when we talk about import duties being an export tax, now let's look at the example of a fruit processing unit in Skardu. So in order to import that unit, you need to pay certain duties. When the duties are high enough, it just simply doesn't make sense to set up a unit and start exporting fruit. And that just basically goes for across all industries. This whole concept of current account deficit बढ़ गया हो यार. Seriously, I mean, if you want to grow your economy, your current account deficit needs to increase.
I feel that a lot of people is like the government over the years, because our governments have been really political. They look at the numbers and they're very short-sighted with us, because unko obviously 2 saal, 3 saal ke andar performance dikhani hai. We brought this down, we brought that down, but they don't really see the outcome over the years. कि किससे आपकी industries develop हो
Well,
रही हैं,
that's
किससे नहीं हो
that's
रही.
the issue at the heart of everything, right? Is that every government,
Yeah.
for at least as far as I remember, is in reactive mode and is trying to react to certain challenges versus even crafting a long-term strategy for what Pakistan needs to do, whether it's on the human
And
development
even if
side
they
or on the
are
economic
crafting
side.
strategies, it's more like, what do voters see? What will they see, and what will make them vote? That's what their strategies are towards the end, after they've set off a few fires. So that's it. But yeah, this year has been pretty okay. We started making our own masks. Good for us. We started making sanitizers. Good for us. But at the end of the day, the problem still remains, again, supply chain. Uske bagair aap jo bhi kar lo, it's all crap.
So I think, to sum up, supply chain was the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues of this year in a long, long time. Hopefully that gets resolved. That's the hope for 2021. Maybe the export sectors continue to grow, and circular debt, obviously fully agree with Amar there that is an area that needs to be resolved. I think we're also out of time, but this was a great roundup of what's happened and what's coming forward. So thank you to the two of you for joining us once again on the podcast. And again, have a great rest of the year. And I'll start bugging you again in 2021. So have a good holiday season.
Thank you, there. Have a good vacation. And yeah, you don't really have a vacation here, so we just continue.
We don't.
You'll just attend shadis and
Yeah.
eat korma.
25
Yeah,
25
no,
December
it's
ko
COVID,
chutti
man. You're dying. You're going to die if you're back.
I think Ariba's
So,
attending
yeah.
some shadis this weekend.
yeah.
I
So
think the only thing that you need to do this year is just stay alive. That's pretty much it. If you're
That is
alive,
true.
you can do much.
Uzar, do us a favor, and iske outro pe staying alive lagana.
Okay, that's a good idea. Maybe we'll do that. Well, to everyone who's listening, thank you for tuning in for this year. We'll see you in 2021. Khud Hafiz.
The office, thank you.